Well, howdy, Northland family and friends. Welcome to a special edition of Extra Takes. So, man, you get like a double dose of Extra Takes.
2 in 1 week.
2 in 1 week. But this one is, I'm telling you, this is the one that is so relevant.
Oh, is it?
It's one everybody wants to hear. I don't know if everybody wants to hear because it's about politics.
That should be the first question: is if you don't want to, if you don't want to engage in politics, why should you listen? Don't turn it off yet.
Yeah, you don't. Yeah, well, because we have Chris Storms with us. Chris is one of our governing elders, and I just love Chris because one, he thinks deeply about things. He has a what is it called? Substack.
Substack, yeah.
Substack. Yeah, so he has I would say a daily blog, but you blog actually very regularly.
Yeah.
And but again, just thinks deeply, and I'll let Chris tell you a little bit more because I want you to know one of our governing elders, especially given the fact that he has graced us with his presence today. But yeah, let me just pause and tell just a little bit about just you, what you do, and all of that.
Okay, so. My wife and I actually met here back in, I started coming here when I got out of the Navy in 94. My wife and I met here in 95. And so we've been here ever since and raised our family here. We have 3 girls and love this place. I'm currently an area developer for Young Life Ministry. And so working to get Young Life started in parts of Central Florida where we're not currently.
So even though you're grown up, you get to be a teenager.
Oh, I love it.
Yeah,
that's one of my favorite things about Young Life is just letting kids be kids. Yeah. But then Young Life leaders, because we walk alongside them,
right?
We get to be kids, and it gets. Yeah.
Well, when I met you, and obviously it was through the search process that I got to meet you, got to hear what you do. Grateful, and honestly, grateful for what you do. Because the next generation is what I'm borrowing a phrase from Reggie McNeil. They are our present future.
Absolutely.
They're not our future.
Right.
They are our present future. And the fact that we have a governing elder that has such a heart, passion, that actually has devoted his life where you could be doing a lot of other things. And you've devoted your life to pouring into the next generation, and this even conversation around politics, I do believe it plays a role because you're engaging them now, and obviously they can't vote yet. Most of them, unless they're 18. But you're engaging this next generation, and they will be the ones voting in the next 3, 5, 10 years. And so I do believe that this is really important that we think deeply about the role of cultural engagement and how we engage in the area of government and even voting. And so what I want to just kind of set up this time, with by way of just kind of introduction is I shot it was actually kind of a lengthy video for social media. It was 5 minutes. So it's not long like our podcast or anything, but it was a 5-minute video that I definitely felt like I just needed to acknowledge the angst that people were feeling.
Sure.
Because I've had people like, why don't you say anything? And I'm like, I did. It was called the TED series, The Church in a Divided Democracy. So I purposely engaged before the angst happened because I knew that the angst was going to happen.
Yeah.
I knew people would be all, why didn't you say this? Why? And I'm like, I have.
Back in the summer.
So, but I felt like I needed to at least put out some resources again, acknowledge the moment that we're in, the angst that people are feeling. I needed to point them back to Jesus. I needed to point them back to some resources that I'd shared. And then I also wanted to provide, and this is where we had some people, you, Gus, and others, help put together some resources. Now, I've had some, good feedback in at least one resource, and so I've changed that because the thing that I shared with the individual that's like, I don't like this resource, is that if we have imperfect candidates that we're voting for, we're going to have imperfect guides that in some sense, so I get that. And so, but it missed the spirit of what we are, again, we're not endorsing any candidate. I don't feel like that's my cause as a pastor, and that's why I wanted to bring Chris on because he's a governing elder, and Chris has been, and I think that, and rightfully so, I think you have every right to do it. I have no problems, but sometimes you do on your own personal, social media, you go a little bit deeper than what I would as a pastor, and I have no problem with that. But as a pastor, as the senior pastor of Northland, I do believe that, listen, I'm going to tell you the values of the kingdom. I'm going to tell you the values of Jesus. I'm going to help us really process some deep, when I say theology, of how we engage with the larger culture, and so that's what I needed to post from a social media standpoint.
Sure.
But I also felt like we could have a good kind of 45-minute discussion on some of these resources, some of the things that we're feeling, that we're seeing, and just see where God steers us. Because I think if people know this, I am not afraid to wade into some pretty messy situations and topics. Like, I am not. But here's the thing that I don't want to do. I didn't want to wade into it from a corporate gathering standpoint when we were going through it.
Sure.
That's what I didn't want to do.
So let's start with talking about a few of the resources that you did share.
Yep.
And then we'll use that as a launching off point to really just dig into get your perspectives, both of you, on how you engage in this election, and then politics, and then after as well, because it's coming up in a week. It's not going to be over after a week. We're going to keep engaging in politics, obviously, as we have been in the years past. So just start with some of the resources, because I think these resources are helpful, because a lot of what we will talk about today, you have thought deeply about and have written several articles about. So just high level, talk about a few of them, and then we'll.
I'll just talk about one, just kind of pointing to the idea of voting, because I do believe that Christians ought to vote. I actually believe that. And it's not just a practical thing. I actually believe it's a theological thing. And so it's rooted in Jeremiah 29, where we read where God's people, and it was the Israelites, at this point they were in exile, but God had told them to seek the shalom of the city to which he had sent them, and that's Babylon. That was the city, that was the empire, the Babylonian Empire at the time. They were in charge. Now, they were not a democracy. They were a monarchy, a dictator-type monarchy, where Nebuchadnezzar, he was the central authority. He was actually seen as divine, just very similar to Egyptian rule, back in even early Old Testament days. So he's divine in the sense of, like, he's kind of this incarnation of a deity. And so what he says went, right? And so now the Israelites, they find themselves in this foreign land under a government that they're not accustomed to, and yet God says to seek the shalom of the city. And part of that shalom is partnering with Babylon for the common good. So you have Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. They are serving in the government of Nebuchadnezzar. I mean, let that sink in. Yeah. Like, this guy was the one who gave the command for the army to be sent out to sack Jerusalem, to dash little babies' heads against the rocks, to kill women and children, this is the guy, but yet God says, I want you to seek the peace of Nebuchadnezzar and the government. Okay, so when it comes to just the role that Christians play in America, so we live in a constitutional republic, also a form of democracy, and so we actually have the opportunity to vote. Yeah. And there are many people throughout the world, they don't have that privilege. They don't have that honor of voting to help steer the direction of the country. And so I believe that it is the Christian's obligation, and that's what I would say, a theological obligation that we have, if we're going to partner with the community, the nation, the state in which we live for the common good, to actually vote. And so, and this is also a theological truth that is picked up by the New Testament. That Paul's going to leverage his citizenship in various ways for the common good and for the glory of King Jesus. And so we as believers, we ought to do that. So I'll just kind of draw that, and you can read that article. I don't just make an exhaustive type of argument, but I definitely give a keen, succinct biblical argument of why we can leverage our earthly citizenship for our heavenly citizenship by voting.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great place to start. So I'll throw this out to both of you, but I'll start with you, Chris. So just personally, why do you engage in consuming political news?
Oh, I mean, the short answer is I want to be informed. You know, I mean, just to piggyback off of what Pastor Josh was saying, in a constitutional republic, and we do have the right to vote. I think we get things, power is a big thing in our world, right? And so when we see somebody in power, we think, oh, well, they're in charge, like the president. But actually, we're in charge. Like the people, like it's our responsibility. It's in our government. It's the people who we elect the president all the way down through all the different forms of government. And so that's a big responsibility, but it's a really good, big privilege as well. And so I want to be as informed as possible.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Anything else to add?
Yeah, and I would say I would piggyback on that and go, absolutely. One of the fascinating things that I do think that we have to keep in mind, and I was listening to one of the podcasts that I love listening to is called Business Wars.
Oh, yeah.
And so recently I was actually listening to this Storyform podcast. It's a 4-part series on the war between CNN and Fox News. And so to Chris's point, we need to be informed, but also we need to just be aware of who's informing and what their goal is, because cable news does have a goal.
Right.
Like they have a goal. But that doesn't mean that you can't digest and process what they're giving, because somewhere between them and what you read, and that's why sometimes we want to produce some resources, like consolidate some resources that, hey, listen, but you need to be informed. And so but you also need to do the work.
Sure.
Yeah. But also be aware of, again, I wouldn't call it deception, I would just call it their purpose. That they might have. And so that would be the only thing that, I would add to that, of being informed. But I do think that that at least from a cultural standpoint, voters in America are lazy. And I think this is where Christians could also play a huge role of, let's not be lazy in our pursuit of being informed. Sure. But I think that we are. I think we wait to the last minute, and if we vote, and again, I think some people just, I'll just vote a party. Okay, listen, if that's what you feel like the Lord wants you to do, but also just be informed about things that are going on, just so that you're not ignorant of it.
Yeah.
I think another way you can be informed too, just your circle. Who in your circle do you trust? Who are your mentors? I have a friend who is a county commissioner, so a lot of times I'll call her and say, "Hey, tell me," especially with the lower, the judges and all of that kind of stuff, just to get her advice. I wrote a thing on my blog about the Amendment 4 last week, I think, and a friend of mine called me, and I was actually kind of nervous because I know that, but her heart was just, she's like, "Hey, can you share with me?" She was asking what's the difference between an amendment and a law, and and I just really appreciated, even though we didn't necessarily agree on everything, but I really appreciated her heart and our friendship of just being able to have that conversation outside of social media.
Yeah.
Person to person on the phone in a civil manner, and we both learned, and
so that's fascinating, because that leads to that next question. Was what came to mind was, how should we view political engagement? Could we see it, or should we see it as an opportunity or a trap for believers? And
I'll let Chris go.
Yeah, so I have a story. I feel like I've seen, I'm in my 50s now, and so over time I've seen the Lord work in me, and it used to be a trap. I mean, if I'm being honest, oh my gosh, yeah. When I was in the Navy, it was Rush Limbaugh all the time. I was just so far on that side, and so fast forward, I was the guy who posted on social media all the time, and then I was doing a direct sales business at the time, so I had built this team of people, and there was an election that happened, and I was very outspoken about my views on it. And I had somebody on my team who I really loved and cared for, and she called me out, and she was like, "Hey, I had all of my friends follow you on Facebook." And she's like, "And you've posted that." She's like, "And I'm so embarrassed." And I stopped watching the news for basically 4 years. I was like, you know what? I can't handle this. I get from that. And I stopped posting about it. I was like, I just can't handle it. Cause I get so worked up and everything. And that was it was a good time to make a decision like that. and it allowed me to re-engage in a much more healthy way. Like now, I really don't post like divisive. I try if I do post something, and I think it's funny you said it's good that I could go deeper or whatever. I think my wife might disagree with you on that, but because she gets nervous, right? But but I really do like it takes me a long time to pray and think through, okay, is this something that's going to be of value that's not going to be divisive, but will be information? And what's my heart? Am I trying to like get somebody and because I think whenever we're trying to do that, and that's
well, so I think it's the motive and the tone. And it's funny if Ann gets nervous, Joni gets. I mean,
sitting in the sermon, right?
Sitting in the sermon, like gosh, poor Joni. Like So, but I definitely can understand that. But going back to, when you're writing something, what is the purpose? What's the motivation? Is it really to inform? Is it to educate? Hey, and from given the fact that you are a church leader, not only in Young Life, but also here at Northland, it is to disciple. So, how do I disciple as opposed to being, because I think there's a difference between being a partisan informant versus being what I would call a discipler that is helping people process. Because I think that because I do think that there is at least a trap. I think the trap, and I see it every political season where, pastors and church leaders and in some sense Christians in the political arena, they're always pitching a trap for us to become partisan. And so I always want to, and this is me as a pastor, and when I say I want to remain neutral, it doesn't mean that I'm remaining neutral from a value standpoint. I'm remaining neutral to a wagon standpoint. I'm not hitching my name to any political wagon. I'm hitching my name to the King of Glory, who's the only wagon that matters. And and that's part of where I'm wanting to inform, like Ed Stetzer, my good friend, he's been here. One of the things I've learned from him is that if I can, if myself as a senior pastor, if I can remain above the fray, I can actually call balls and strikes on both.
Right.
But if I begin to attach my wagon but you have to understand too, like, so Chris, it's so funny. Like, my family and I would even say my family now. There's some partisan people, and I'm from the deep South, so you can just even imagine where a lot of their loyalties lie, now. So I grew up, and we would, I'm talking about we would be debating Calvinism, and so election and grace on kind of in 1 minute, and then the next, talking about and yelling at each other about the political realm in the next. We just ebbed and flowed out of theology and politics. And so I grew up with that, and I love engaging in it. But now as a pastor, I do have to, and again, it's not that I don't want to wade into it. I have to be very careful with how I wade into it to make sure I'm keeping the posture of someone who is discipling in a processing manner versus a partisan who's telling you what to do.
Well, and to that point, this past weekend you said, please stop playing their political game.
Yeah.
So how do we engage and not play the political game?
What? So here's what, I'm glad you put me on the spot, man, because sometimes I say that because it's almost like a Jesus game. And let me tell you what it means by a Jesus game. Okay. So you have to understand, too, when you're reading the Gospels, you had the Pharisees and Sadducees. Yeah. Pharisees right, Sadducees left. Sadducees they were liberal. They only bought into the first 5 books of the Old Testament. They didn't buy into all the other. They didn't buy into miracles. They didn't believe in the resurrection. And they're politically aligned with Rome. Yeah. Okay, but they're Jewish. Okay, the Pharisees, on the other hand, they're the conservative right, and they're always wanting to trap Jesus. Yeah. And so Jesus is going to say things that will evade the trap of the left and the right. Yeah. So sometimes I'm going to say something that, depending on where you're sitting, will depend on how you're going to interpret it.
Both sides may get frustrated.
Or they'll think about it in their own way.
Different way, yeah.
You know what Jesus said a lot of times though is like, have you not read? He like always pointed them back to Scripture, right? And so when they would try to trap him or ask him a question, have you not read?
So I actually take it as a challenge. Like, and so, but what I mean by that is when you're watching the political ads, I just want to roll
right.
I just shake my head. Like, if a believer will believe any of those ads, I'm talking about from a Republican ad to a Democrat ad. I'm like, if you believe everything that ad just said, something's wrong with you. I just said it. So that's the political game, because that's the game. Because now they have all of these focus groups on what the buzzwords are to get people to go, yeah, no.
See, we don't think of it as a game. We think of it as truth, right? If we're not thinking deeply, and as you asserted earlier, many of us, as it becomes more divisive, I think there's more of us that just want to put our head in the sand.
Well, here's another game. Like, and I learned this in the book called Amusing Ourselves to Death. It's by Neil Postman. Neil Postman, he's not a believer. It's a secular book. But he talks about the attention span of human beings over, the last several decades. But he was talking about even the political realm. Like when Abraham Lincoln and Stephen Douglas were running, their debates lasted hours, like hours, 3, 4, 5, 6 hours. They would have to take a break and eat because they wanted to know. But now we have turned, and it's a political game. It really, it's a political popularity contest of around what sound bites can this news agency, and it's like, we have to now, and this is why this game is really detrimental to really America. It actually hurts us, the game that the political realm plays now, is because we have now turned, in some sense, one of the most important things that we can do as Americans to vote, to steer the country, from a voting standpoint, into sound bites and not actually hear what they believe. And that's dangerous ultimately. And then that's why America, I actually think is part of the reason why America is in this kind of dumpster fire, a cesspool that they're in, is because we have in some sense bought into a political game as opposed to understanding really what the values of the candidates are. What are their policies? What will they do? As opposed to, well, let me tell you what I'm going to do in office. And they don't really even tell you anything.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on how you engage without, falling prey to that game?
Like I said before, it was a trap for me before. I think now, just taking it for what just taking in the information, and I do think I'm in a better place, just emotionally, to be able just to understand the issues. Do I really understand? What are tariffs? What is that going to, just if you're talking about the sound bites, one side says I'm going to do tariffs, the other side says tariffs are going to destroy the economy. Well, I don't really understand what tariffs do, so why don't I go research tariffs, and
last night I told Kaylee, just put that in the ChatGPT, because we need to learn more about that, about tariffs.
But no, that's so important. Like, Chris, what you're saying is so important, because it is. That's how you don't fall prey. Let me just educate myself on what a tariff was not, because this is the game. It's doomsday if the other person gets elected, which I always find that it is so unhelpful. It is so unhelpful. But that's the game, because we are conditioned, and this is aside from political, the political game, is that we're so conditioned to make decisions based upon fear. And so we're constantly being driven now politically, the political game, this person is dangerous for America, and if he does, we will cease to be a democracy. But let's but this is why I also believe that part of the role of Christians is to actually understand the founding of the nation. That part, actually part of even, and I do believe that is part of the Imago Dei genius of the founding fathers, is to set up 3 different You got the executive branches of government. You got the executive, the judicial, and the legislative, because they did not want this swinging pendulum. Because even in a monarchy, you could have a benevolent monarch, but he die, and then his son takes the reign, and he's a complete just imbecile who is a narcissist that would and so they didn't want the pendulum to swing every 4 years or every 8 years. And so to set up the checks and balances, and this is what I covered in The Church in a Divided Democracy, but just even knowing that and what we have set and what it seems like we have set up even in the last, I would actually say 20 years of what I've really been following in American politics, is we've now just kind of set up this swinging pendulum. And here's what I would actually say about the swinging pendulum that we have set up. No wonder Americans are sick. Because if you're constantly swinging the pendulum and bouncing back and forth in this pinball way, I mean, what do you expect?
Yeah.
And so, anyways, that's just some other food for thought of how I process just the game that we're in, and I understand. But there are some serious values that we do need to keep in mind, and that there are values that both sides represent, and there are some values that are absolutely detrimental to the imago Dei that a side would hold.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's the values too that used to government would be okay. Where are we going to build the roads? Where are we, how are we going to handle taxes? And those are things that aren't moral issues. A lot of things that are just differences of opinion. But now it's like these huge moral issues. It's not the first time. I mean, slavery was a good example. It's happened in the past where there's been a big moral issue, and there's a right side and a wrong side to that particular issue.
Yeah.
And I think that's the case now as well with a few different things. That there's moral issues have entered the realm of politics, which makes it really challenging.
No, and that's a really good point. So I'll just stress what he just said by just stressing what he just said. Yeah, because there is that. I mean, there is that difference between structural policies, economic, but even economic policies versus moral policies.
Yeah.
Sure.
But both of them, this is where I would say, so the moral policies are going to give more weight to what the scriptures teach. Now, when I say more weight, in terms of what is sacred. Now, in terms of economic policies, don't necessarily believe that that's getting into the sacred realm of a human life, of marriage, of the imago Dei, versus, the economic policies, what will create flourishing. Yep. Because I think that there might be, both a Democrat and a Republican might have two different policies, but if you can work both of them to, in some sense, find some common ground, there might be a sense of creating flourishing, but to really stress what Chris said is that politics have now moved into broadening really the values that every single, it seems like now election year, there are some true sacred values that are at stake when it comes to how we are to think as Christians.
Yeah, well said. So as leaders in the church, I'll throw this out to both of you. Should it be different with how church leaders engage in these issues than how a congregant engages?
I'll turn to Chris.
I was going to turn to you.
Oh,
no.
You're deferring to one another.
I do think, as a leader in the church, like it's our job to disciple. That's one of our jobs, and so but I do think that every believer has, as a believer, go and make disciples. Like we all have this responsibility to be teaching, and so I don't know that I would say that there's a huge difference. Other than to be praying, and I think when you're a church leader, you're a pastor, especially, like you're opening your mouth. Like you've been called to open your mouth and say things, and so really praying for wisdom of, okay, how am I going to say this the way that God wants me to say this?
Sure.
And
yeah. So, and I did not put this article in the shared resources, and maybe we can put it in another post that maybe we'll do email or something. But it was titled when the cultural climate gets political, how does the church stay missional? And so just a couple things that I talk about. We've talked about some of these already, but just don't get sucked into partisan politics. And I just write, as the people of God, we are not American elephants or American donkeys first, but we are first and foremost belong to the party of the Lion of the tribe of Judah, and our allegiance ultimately rests with Him and Him alone. And what you actually do find that Jesus never entangled himself in the politics of his day, but was able to wisely and winsomely navigate politically toxic traps and point to another kingdom and another way of looking at things. The second way is this: model unity and diversity. And I think this is one of the things that the church ought to be able to model, because obviously our nation and the climate that it has really moved towards do not know how to model e pluribus unum, from one, from many one. But the church ought to, because we have the Spirit of God living inside of us. So we ought to be able to model unity in diversity. The third is to seek the peace and prosperity of the city. So once again, just reminding ourselves, hey, listen, to be able to stay, to in some sense, stay missionally engaged is not to see the other party and the lost people of the other party as enemies. You cannot win who you hate. And I keep saying that. You cannot win who you hate. And if you blame them for stealing your country from you, from from what you grew up in, how in the world are you going to reach them with the gospel? Yep. The other one is pray and submit to governing authorities. And again, I do believe that we live now in a day and age where political partisanship is whoever is elected is, you're going to spend the first 3, 6, maybe 6 months, 2 years going, well, that's not my president. Okay, well, is that what we're supposed to model? Because, regardless of what happens, we are called to submit to governmental authorities. Now, this leads to the next, is that we peacefully protest policies and laws that harm the good life or the common good, and we work to reverse them. And that's a way that we do so through voting. But also, if a governing authority ever tells us to do something that is against the ultimate law of Christ, we peacefully say, no, we cannot do that. And that's where you call it civil disobedience. But then we also, at the very end, is we're going to demonstrate and declare the already but not yet kingdom politic of Jesus. Because some people, in the church world, and this is just because they don't know, is that politics, some people say, well, we should never engage in politics. Actually, Jesus, he has a politic. It is a public way of living. That's actually what politics simply means. It's a public, as a very, when I say general, at the very end of the day, foundational understanding of politics, it is a public way of living within an environment. And so I believe God is on mission to create a people from all peoples to reflect His glory in all spheres of life. And this is the mission that God has been on since the very beginning. And Jesus is the climactic crescendo in God's mission, in that He inaugurated the kingdom of God, and through His death and resurrection sealed the future consummation of the kingdom and new creations. And so what we're doing is we're living in light of that new creation now, because we're new creatures in Him. And so, but what we're doing is we're maintaining that missional vision of making sure that our politic is the kingdom politic, and we're partnering with America for the common good in taking that politic, and we're trying to flesh it out in a non-coercive way for the glory of God and the good and even the salvation of the world. Yeah,
I think it helps put things into perspective when you say Jesus has a politic. A public way of living, it helps us understand the consequences of devoting our full allegiance to one party.
Yeah.
Right? Because if we are, then we are naturally not able to devote our full allegiance to Jesus' politic.
Yeah,
that's the danger.
And let's go back to this idea too, because I think now that I've introduced that, we can now make a connection about values. Okay, so His politic is always going to value life. is going to value life in the womb. He says that you are fearfully and wonderfully made. Before I formed you in the womb, I knew you. So that is a politic of Jesus. Politic of Jesus is to care for the marginalized, the vulnerable, the widow, the orphan, the sojourner, the alien. Now, I do believe that when it comes to a sovereign nation, I believe that they need to have laws where people come in there lawfully, legally, and all of that stuff. But in terms of a politic of Jesus, he's always going to care for people. Imago Dei, when it comes to just us as human beings, that there should be a dignity, there should be a respect for all human beings, regardless of their ethnicity, regardless of their gender. I believe that there is a sanctity and a sacredness of marriage. So there is a value that Jesus even exclaims. Okay, so these are all and you could put these in the camp of moral values.
Sure.
Okay, but economic values. Okay, so we do know that there are some economic values, that there should be some equality. One kind of segment of the population should not be deceiving, should not be abusing power to their economic gain, but there should be an equality, and equity just simply means fairness. Those are values. And then, but okay, what does that? How does that look like in a company? How does that look like in a nation? There might be several things that you need to set up. So that might look a little bit different from a structural, strategic element versus the moral element. There might be many ways to pursue economic, stability, equality, and fairness for the flourishing. But also, here's another thing is that let's just say you have two people who in some sense are equal in terms of just their platform and their status in life, but one person is lazy and one person is not. Here's what even the Bible says, that Paul says, if you're not willing to work, and he's talking to believers, if you're not willing to work and labor and go to work providing for your family, you're worse than an unbeliever. So there is this element of hard work. Now, but I do believe that there are people within a demographic that have some disadvantage, and so we need to work to create some equality there, because they could work just as hard, but because of where they're coming from, it might be a slight, a disadvantage or a slight disadvantage. But all I'm saying there is that those are a little bit more involved processing versus easy, no, we right. believe in protecting the unborn. Does that make sense? Anything to add there, Chris, of how,
Well, I was just thinking of, what Jesus tells us to go be salt and to be, we're all sinful. The whole world is sinful. And we go, the law of entropy, I think, is the one where everything goes toward disorder and chaos. Is that right?
Yeah.
And so that's the direction of the world. And salt is a preservative. And so for us to be engaged, and in those areas where, man, we need to preserve this, and keep it from going to chaos, because chaos is not flourishing for anybody.
Nope.
So just to be salt like Jesus tells us to be.
That's
in the culture.
That's an incredible image and picture.
Yeah. The other thing I was just thinking about, and this, I don't know if, what about running for office? We talk a lot about how we're voting and all that kind of stuff, but what about people, especially at a local level? Should believers be running for office because that's really involved in politics? Now you're part of the game, I guess, to some extent, and even if you don't want to,
sure.
How would
I would highly encourage. I mean, here's what I'm hoping and praying for, even at Northland, is that coming out of Northland over the next, season of ministry, is that we have coming up in our body the next county commissioner, the next mayor, the next state senator, the next federal, I say federal, but because you have state senators and then you have, I guess they call it just senators, right?
Yeah.
I'm hoping, because I do believe that that's a way to engage, because I do think that by and large, I'm going to say in general, and sometimes when you make general statements, it's hard, but I want to, and I'm probably going to open more of a can of worms with what I'm about to say.
Sorry, Joni. Sorry, Joni.
Say
Here goes.
We need to untangle the web of Christendom and nationalism. And I think that's the way a lot of Christians typically think today, is because there are some people that still believe, and again, I understand why they believe it, but I am a staunch advocate and would argue always against it now. But America was not founded as a Christian nation; it was founded upon Judeo-Christian values. But what has happened is, because it was planted, America was planted in a day and age where really all over the Western world, it was Christendom, where the church was the center of society. So it gave this appearance and feel that we were all Christians, and thus a Christian society, because we prayed in school, because we all of this, and so the church just simply focused on spiritual things in terms of, hey, we're just going to read the Bible, and we're going to teach the Bible and tell you how to be saved. But you're going to live, and what we have seen over the last 250 years, and now in this 21st century, and really I would say and it's accelerated over the last 30 to 50 years of this secular progressive society that is going down more of the road of an agnostic atheist type of road, where the church has been left in the dust. And so how do we now think? And so I want us to raise up the next generation that says, yes, we are a nation founded upon Judeo-Christian values, which does give us a really good moral framework for how to have a just, good society. Because if you go down the road that this other kind of demographic is going down, there literally is no framework to what a just, good society looks like, because they have literally no foundation. It's like judges. It's like, whatever, there was no king in the day, so people did whatever they want to. Yeah. Because when you have no authority and people become the authority, it's what, Christians talk about, is just chaos. Yeah. So that's what I hope and pray, that we can raise up a next generation that actually thinks from a Christocentric, a Christ-centered, kingdom-oriented Jesus politic for the good of American society, without the coercion type of language that some people have used to reclaim something that I think falsely existed.
Yeah. Yeah, well said.
That's good.
Everyone did right in their own eyes, and that is that's scary. So as I'm thinking about what we consume, we even talked about this with our TED series and then our A&E series this past summer. What we consume really can really affect us. It affects us with our songs, and then as we're talking about political engagement, it can affect who we are and what we think, and then how we act. So I'll start with you, Chris. How do you guard against what you're consuming, and specifically, this is all of life, but specifically politics? How do you guard against it really affecting your mindset and your behavior over consuming the Word of God, and continually being transformed into His image and not the image of Adam?
Yeah, I think it's fun. I mean, there's practical ways. I was finding myself on Instagram. I followed all these news, and so I stopped. Like, I was like, I'm not following none of them anymore. So now I just follow people that I know. Okay. And I also set a time limit on Instagram for 15 minutes a day. And so I'm like, once I'm there, I'm there. But I will tell you, the hardest time for me, I get up in the mornings. I get up pretty early. I try to be disciplined and spending time in the Word. So I get up, I make a coffee, and while I'm making my coffee, I have my phone out, and more often than not, it's not great, but I'll go to a news site,
sure,
and then and then I'm spending 20 minutes looking at news.
You get
before
sucked. Yeah.
Yeah, you just get sucked in. And so I really have to like be very intentional. Like I'm going to set my phone down. I'm going to pick up my Bible, and I'm going to spend time in the Word. And
It happens quickly, doesn't it?
Oh my gosh. Yeah.
I can relate to that.
Yeah.
You're just making coffee, and all of a sudden you're
I got to do something.
You're angry because you're watching.
But,
You're scrolling.
I'm scrolling.
Yeah.
Yep.
That I love the practicalness of that, because sometimes it is actually being very, very critical. So sometimes we fall into the trap of scrolling or whatever, but then it's actually being critical of who am I deciding, who have I subscribed to. And if we think about that, we get to a point where in our email we can be very discerning about who we're subscribing to and who we unsubscribe to. But every single social media platform, whoever we're following, we're subscribed to, right? And we can unsubscribe.
Yeah.
We can say we're not gonna allow that in. That's a very, very practical thing, because if you are conscious of how it affects you and your behavior, I mean, I think if we're honest, it can really change our mood and our days and the way we think, and yeah.
Well, here's the other thing. Like, I think we give ourselves too much self-importance almost. Like, voting is important. Our vote matters, but only a little bit, right? I mean, so yes, go vote, but scrolling through that news and like, you're already going to do what you're going to like.
Yeah.
You pretty much, most everybody knows how they're going to go vote when they go vote. Yes, be informed, but man, it doesn't. I'll be honest. Like, if I start reading news, and then I'm like, okay, I got to put my phone down and pick up my Bible, start reading. My mind is still over here, and I'm not even really paying attention to what God is trying to teach me.
So,
It's good.
this is just how my mind works. I'm very sorry how my mind works, by the way. But so you say, like, how do you guard against what we are consuming?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's just go back to Genesis 3, but let's really understand the idea of consuming. I'm trying to remember the book, but it basically is you are what you consume. Okay, so when Eve's looking at the tree, she's not consuming. It's just appealing to her at that point.
Okay.
But it's when she takes and consumes, that which she consumes transforms her. So this is part of where we need to understand what the difference is of seeing something and then letting its appearance and its appeal to turn into desire, and that desire turn into consumption.
Sure.
Because it's okay to scroll. It's okay to, in some sense, hear. But that's where you have to process, is this something worth consuming? Now, here's one of the things that I would just say in the political realm in which we live, and this is even for talk radio and news, news commentary and whatever else they call it, is if there's people that are just railing, angry, vitriolic, you just might want to be careful, because if you consume that, that's what you will become. Yeah. Now, if you want to, because there are times where, listen, I know, I know what this person is, but I need to hear what they're going to say, because I want to at least be informed on what that side's going to say. But I know they're angry. But I need to be informed, because I need to know how they're processing it. But then also, hey, I need to hear what this person is going to process without consuming it. And see, that's what's happened in that's what's happened in our cultural climate, is that we're consuming rather than processing.
Yeah.
So like when you eat, I don't like eating wings, at least bone in wings.
Some boneless wings. I
like boneless wings.
I don't like bone-in.
But people,
He's like a bone-in master.
Well, you are. So hang on. So I'm going to keep what I'm saying. All right. So tell people, because you got a wing-a-thon coming up.
We do. We have a wing-a-thon.
Okay.
So we have.
And this is a commercial, by the way. I'm just
talking. Yeah. So hey, we got a wing-a-thon coming up to raise money for kids to go to camp, and so we have 14 people who are eating wings, and we get people to sponsor us per wing. So I'm eating 25.
So you're eating 25. All right. So can you tell people where to go? Because we have about 300, 400, 500 people listen to this.
I guess go to seminolecounty.younglife.org and the link will be up there.
Awesome. All right, so wings. I don't like eating bone-in wings. No. And the reason why for me it's just too messy. That's the reason why. So I like boneless wings. However,
you like to eat with a fork and knife?
Wings?
Yeah, you said it's too messy.
But a fork and knife with no. But here's the thing about bone-in wings is that you don't eat the entire wing. You got to eat the meat and you got to spit out the bones. So you're not consuming everything. You're consuming the healthy parts. So I'm just trying to help you think through this idea of consuming, because you are what you consume. And so you can hear and you can digest even certain things that might be typically unhealthy if you consumed everything.
Sure.
So in some sense you can eat it. Just know what you need to filter out in terms of again, I'm talking more about the political environment, because sometimes it's hard to even see in our environment. Well, it's hard to, in some sense, conceive that we can consume every single thing that we would hear in our environment. But I'm not telling you not to listen or not to at least try to inform yourself in a way where you can digest and consume the meat and spit out the bones.
It's a great analogy.
So
good job.
Or you can just eat boneless wings. I mean,
there you go.
Yes.
The analogy falls apart.
It does fall apart. Yeah. But in the political realm, it's a bone-in wing. Just spit out the bones.
That's great.
You got anything else?
I do.
Okay. Oops, sorry.
But that idea of consuming versus processing is really interesting, because I do think we have a challenge engaging without consuming, and part of it is how we're doing it in the phones, and it's set up in a way that just sucks us in. So what are your thoughts? Well,
and again, this is why I think. I mean, this is why I think it is because people just want to be told what to do, as opposed to be told to think deeply about something. It's easier just to be told in certain things, here, go do this. This way, everybody's looking for a quick fix. Sure. Everybody's looking for a microwave strategy. I mean, that is in some sense the mediocrity of our culture. Let me just be honest about that. Is that we don't want to actually do the hard work of processing. We just want people to hand us something. And so, and that's where I know that, and this is one of the things I actually love about Chris, the governing elders, and how we they have embraced and they've embraced me. Like, I want us to think deeply about things. I just don't want us to do things because we've always done them. I don't want us to do things because it's easy to do it. No, let's think deeply about this. So because it's not just sometimes clear and cut, in every realm, so that's where I want us, as we continue to journey deeper in the 21st century, let us really reimagine, rethink, what does it mean to be the people of God in this time period that has completely changed. We're living in a day that was not here in 2001. It wasn't here in 1990. And then, it is a new day.
Sure.
And how do we engage in a way that is faithful to the Lord, but for the good of society?
Awesome. All right, so I have two more questions.
Okay.
So after the election, what advice would you give us of processing, regardless of the outcome?
I'll let Chris go first.
Yeah, well, I was just thinking about, I think we talked a little bit about fear. So I think after the election, there's going to be, because of what has been set up on both sides, whatever happens on the presidential level anyway, there's going to be a lot of people who are fearful.
Sure.
And I think as believers, I would just ask the question, what are you afraid of? I mean, we're so egocentric. We think that America, yes, I love America. God, I feel like God has blessed us, but nations come and go. I mean, you look throughout all of history, but God is the consistent, right? God can work through a monarchy. He can work through communism. He can work through what we have here. In fact, the fastest growing churches, I believe, are in places where Christians are persecuted, right?
Yeah.
And so if
Iran and China.
Yeah. And so if we're really, Jesus said, blessed are the persecuted. So if our fear is, as Christians, is, oh gosh, our country's going to go away. That's not great. I want my country to flourish, like we've talked about. but God's still in control, even if it's not flourishing. And our kingdom is His kingdom, and our prayer should be, Lord, let your church go forward, however and in whatever way. If you look at, I think it was the
that's amazing.
Yeah,
Lord, let your church go forward. Yeah.
You know, one of the sad, I actually see it as a sad reality. Other people may not see it as a sad reality, but during COVID, do you know the churches that grew the most were basically partisan churches?
Yeah.
Because of where they fell on the political spectrum. And I just don't know if that, again, I'm gonna be humble in this regard and go, I just don't know if that's really the heart of Christ, but that's part of where I would say after the election, what advice would you give is that you have to trust in the sovereignty of God, that He knows, and He's still sitting on His throne, and He ain't worried. And then you also have to fight for unity within the church. You know, and again, I will keep stressing this, and I know it probably ticks some people off, but we are not called to be unified around a donkey or an elephant. We are called to be unified around Jesus. And so that's what you have to fight for. And, you know, when people flee to go to basically Republican churches, I just don't know if that's really the heart of God. You know, because here's one of the things, because I feel like the church falls victim to what the larger culture has, because when these political sides, basically smear the political opponent, they are isolating basically half of the nation's population. Yeah. How do you think the half of the nation population is going to feel about you because you've just smeared the person that they're for, right? And so when we live, when there are these partisan churches, and when I say partisan churches, that they clearly articulate and endorse a political, party. I'm trying to wrestle with this. How do you reach half of the population that didn't vote for that person or that party? And so that's what my hope and prayer is after the election. This would be really cool. This was, I'm trying to think of a little fun, catchy way of saying it, but it doesn't come to my mind. But wouldn't it be cool that after the election, the advice you would give us is do what you did before the election? Just loving people, loving Jesus, seeking to be the salt and light of the world, and I mean, like wouldn't it be cool that we didn't, in some sense, have to change anything, but there was this stability and consistency, this pillar-like quality that we learned about, in was it Philadelphia?
Because if we're living as pillars, the response is keep doing what you're doing.
Keep doing what you're doing.
Wow.
Well, this week you asked the question. I mean, you went through all the different churches and you said, "What did Jesus tell them?" And it was repent. And I think honestly, like I've had to do that a lot. I told you at the beginning, like I used to be a jerk, like politically, and I had to go to people like that lady who messaged me. Like I had to humble myself and go to her and say, "I am so sorry." Yeah. And I think there's a lot of people out there. Like if I look at my Facebook feed, I'm like, you probably need to go apologize to that person. So if you're a believer and if you're trying to convince somebody to vote for a political person more than you're trying to convince somebody to follow Jesus, like there's a problem, right? And so maybe there's people you need to go apologize to before the election, maybe right now, and say, hey, we should, this debate has gone too far. It's gotten personal, and I'm sorry.
Mic drop. Wow, you're making Lil Gabe nervous.
So for those of you who are listening on Spotify or audio, I just dropped the mic. But I caught it because we want to be a good steward of what God's given us.
So that really leads us to our last question. And in the response from both of you were prayers. And that is my last question is how should we pray? So this week and after, specifically around this conversation of the election and politics, how should we pray?
I mean, pray for your enemies, first of all. I mean, Jesus tells us to do that. And I work with middle school and high school kids, and I had a Bible study this morning with some middle school kids, and one of our guys had been in a fight. And so I asked, hey, what was the kid's name? And at the end of our Bible study, I was like, hey, let's pray for in his eyes, but he knew. I mean, he's like, sure. Yeah, we need to do that, and so are you, if you're, on the Kamala, side, then are you praying for Donald Trump? Right, and if you're on Donald Trump's side, are you praying for her? And that should be our our prayer,
Yeah.
and for all, and that God's will would be done. And then if we pray that,
Then what do we have
Yeah.
to fear?
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the article. So I think what we might do is, so when this podcast released, and we'll put it on social media and also put it in an email,
Okay.
and then just put those resources again,
Sure.
and I'll add the resource that I shared at the very beginning.
Sure.
But so let me end with something that I don't have in one of these articles in terms of what to pray for. Let's look at what Jesus taught us to pray for. So, our Father, who are in heaven, hallowed be your name. And Chris just said it, your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. So we're going to pray for God's will to be done here on earth as it is in heaven. And then it says, give us this day our daily bread. Okay, and I don't think people a lot of times realize, like, this is kind of a callback too of manna. In the wilderness, God provided manna, all what they needed for that day. Now on the Sabbath, so on Friday He provided 2 days worth, and so that they didn't have to collect on Saturday. So here's what I believe that God's going to give us what we need, not what we want and not what we desire. So just realize that when we're going to ask God to give us this day our daily bread, He's going to give us. We're asking for Him to give us what we need, not what we want.
Yeah.
So He says, "Give us this day our daily bread," and what's the next? Is to forgive us of our trespasses as we forgive those who has trespassed against us. So it goes back to what Chris just said. We're going to love our enemies, those who have sinned against us, and whether it's a political policy that we don't like, whether it's we feel like they stole something, whatever it may be, we're going to forgive them as God has forgiven us. And we're going to ask God not to lead us into temptation, but to deliver us from evil. So you can just pray the Lord's Prayer, and we've talked through that. So lead us not into temptation. So I just saw this Facebook feed, or I just saw this article. I just listened to this political commentator, and I'm tempted. But we're going to ask the Lord, lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. And that what's the end? For yours is the kingdom, the power, the glory forever. His is the power that endures forever. His kingdom is everlasting from everlasting. And so if we can kind of keep that in mind, just the Lord's Prayer, and kind of use that as a framework to help process and pray through this season, and even after the season, it will go a long way to keeping us stable and pillars in the house of our God.
Amen. What a great conversation. Thanks,
fun.
guys.
Well, thanks, Matt, for leading us through that. And Chris, thanks so much for joining this special
A lot of fun.
extra takes. So super grateful for you. Oh, real quick, tell them also where that they can find your Substack.
It's chrisstorms.substack.com.
That's it.
That's it.
chrisstorms.substack.com.
Yeah.
There you go. Well, super grateful for you and how God uses you here at Northland. And Northland, family and friends, thank you so much for tuning in to this special episode of Extra Takes. Blessings.